Welcome everyone to Rethinking Balance Sheets.
Jackie 啊，你有捌聽啲咧叫 app 叫 Nicole 咯
？Nicole 是什麼？
唔是啦，我教你講 app 啦嘛。嘅你看啲 Nicole 你看，伊加了有真正是 article、podcast、courses 嘅啊。我教你講啊，你愛變好命，你愛好命。
愛好命啊，定啲
你愛趁錢無？
趁錢類咯。
啊，所以啊，你特別用 Nicole，真係說，你睇了啦，你看誒 article 嘅了，你睇了，你變真高嘅，知無？
唔嘢無，嚟我看啲。
有影你看啲 article 看按照好命，按照趁錢類，哇！呀，你睇。
一個看好了嘛，真嚟就搞。
有啦，教你講了嘛，你咪聽，當見你特別去看，特別看個了，睇個了。
你講你真搞啦
，OK，好，你先好都來。
Welcome everyone to Rethinking Balance Sheet, and as always, every Friday we talk about how you can look at your balance sheet in a different way. And joining me, as always, is my partner and in crime, I think, right? We will emphasize the crime piece, right? Ravi Narayanan from Stage 3 Capital. Ravi, welcome to the show. And today we've got very interesting episode because it's like we're doing two things at once, right? Something we like to do, right? Multitask and multi-everything in our lives, right? So tell us what's happening today, Ravi.
Roshan, it's also a bit of deja vu. We're back in a complete lockdown. You remember we did a series on, restructuring during times of crisis, and we did 3 of it, and there was actually a series of 5. There's 4 and 5. So we've actually taken this opportunity on to do 4 and 5. I'm not sure if you got anything to share with the other users. I know I can talk through the first 3 episodes. Do you have anything?
Why don't we summarize that into a quick video so that everyone can kind of understand what episode 1, 2, and 3 was about? Shall I do that, Ravi?
Yeah, that's great. Then it'll really lead nicely into 4.
All right, so let's do a quick summary. Guys, watch this. This will give you a good sense of episode 1, 2, and 3, which was from last year, and then we'll be right back with an amazing guest who's going to take us through this whole idea of negotiations in restructuring. So let's watch a quick summary of what happened in the past.
When we think of the business cycle, you've got the launch phase, the growth phase, the shakeout state, maturity, decline, and eventually debt. But when most people think of non-distress restructuring, then what you will see is this point here, which is the company starts to go into decline, and what the business leaders will do is try to revive the business and then get it back up on the growth path, on the mature path again. What we are seeing now is this red flag here, which is very, very different. We've gone straight down into a crisis, and the mindset that we need is to go back all the way to where we were in the growth phase.
When you have unknowns, right, you really need special advisors who are objective, credible, and as passionate as you over the business that you need to be consulting, right? And to be honest, like these honest advisors, right, should be speaking the same language as you are, and they should be able to answer or able to help you with your business plan, tell you things, validate, invalidate your assumptions, and most importantly, right, guide you through this complex, drawn-out process to get it right, right?
We think the CDRC and the SRRC approach is good because you are able to achieve a considerable amount of success, and there's a right mix of protection provided by the standstill. You have to go on a consensus basis, and there are clear rules in place for CDRC and SDRS. The preferred route is Section 366 plus CDRC. When you decide on which option is best for you, you need to understand the characteristics of each of these options. Consider the scope of the various options that are available. Under CDRC, you will have they have a definition of what they call participating institutions. Okay, and these are essentially financial institution creditors. But if you do not fall within this category, CDRC does not exclude. You can, if you want, you can participate along with the process, and as long as you fall within the same class of creditor as well.
If you look over the past 40 years, the majority of value has actually transitioned into intangible assets. And those intangible assets are everywhere. Most companies have them as platforms or relationships, designs, networks, content, brands. These are what we call the blood that actually makes companies profitable. And sometimes they don't fully understand what intangible assets they actually own. It might be the company culture, it might be data sets that are hidden away. And if you don't understand the assets that they own, then they can't actually pull out all the extent of the risks. And that will have impact on their financial results if they don't understand where that comes from. And if they don't know what they have, then of course it's hard to unlock value, especially in a time like COVID, where you might need to think about pivoting, changing directions, partnering with a competitor to stay in business, or restructuring to make sure that you can continue business. But when you actually put in intangible assets into the mix, you can start to leverage strategic value more effectively. You can actually start to see, well, what do these assets look like in the hands of a bigger player? Instead of restructuring and keeping my team the same way, what if we split it into two and licensed one of our businesses and ran the other business? Intangible assets can be a significant turbocharger, but they can also be a significant risk if they're not understood or valued properly.
So Ravi, that was a quick summary video, but maybe you can just capture the key lessons we learned in 30 seconds or so. Tell us at the heart of it, right? What were the key lessons that we learned from this whole series that was having? I mean, it was about mindsets being changed. It's about driving certain capability or leveraging certain capabilities already out there, and ultimately it's about understanding your own business and your balance sheet, which what I guess Tyler talked about intangible assets. Tell us, summarize it for us, Ravi.
Okay, I think where the series runs is like this, Roshan. First is, I think we got it right when we said the mindset's the first thing. You can't solve a problem unless you change your mindset. What Devin was speaking was alternatives and options. Once you recognize you've got a problem, which way do we go? There are several legal parts. There was CDRC, SRRC, and so on. So then, okay, we've decided we're going to do something. Then we decide how we're going to do something, right? And then the whole next three parts is about doing the restructuring. So there's the first part, which we call the origination phase, when you come up with the ideas, looking at intangibles, your business plan, all that stuff. And then you're able to take a proposal to your creditors and say, look, yes, I am in distress, but here's how I propose to solve it. Now, it'll be very nice if the creditor says, thank you very much, we accept it and let's move on. Doesn't quite work that way. So from that phase, we then start the negotiations. And we are really lucky here to have Dato Derrick, who's without doubt acknowledged in Malaysia as the person in the negotiation. And finally, we'll have next week's series with the firm, Mr. Li Shi of Li Chiwi Partners, and also one of our managers who does a lot of the final parts. You got everybody agreement in principle. Now, how do you execute it? You go to court, you get the documents done, you get the shares issued, all that stuff comes in next year. That's a nice series of 5 episodes. Great to do 4 and 5. Unfortunately, at MCO again, but maybe everybody's at home. They'll be happy to hear us out.
Sure. And so let's get our guests in, but quick comments from our guests. We've already have many guests coming. RBS in lockdown. Nasir says, good morning, stay vigilant, Ravi. I think that's specifically for you. Don't travel so much. And Peter Loh says, very good sharing and insight. Peter, we're going to come into the meatier, more exciting sharing. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to get to the fun part. And so let's invite our guest, Dato Derrick Fernandez, to join us on our show. Dato Derrick, welcome to Rethinking Balance Sheets. I'm here with Ravi Navaratnam. And Ravi, you want to quickly set us up and introduce Dato Derrick to us?
Well, I've known Dato Derrick since the Asian financial crisis. Both of us were part of the six band which were put together to set up Danaharta during the Asian financial crisis. We went our separate paths for a while after Danaharta. Dato Derrick I went back to PwC and then to Bursa. Dato Derrick went on to RHB as Chief Credit Officer. And then a few years later, we were not doing quite, we took some time off work. We decided we will try to help small companies raise money. Really the essence of the rethinking balance sheets. But lo and behold, people started coming back and asking us, can you help restructure companies? So we've been at this for the last 15 years, doing this as part of many things that we do in corporate finance.
So, Dato Derrick, welcome to the show. And we got to start by asking about debt restructuring, right, and negotiation, right? So, how do you do that? I mean, what's your magic secret sauce that you use to get parties to quickly agree? You know, when you're working on this whole idea of debt restructuring, especially with CDRC.
Oh, but that's you're starting me off on a very, very challenging question,
Well,
Roshan.
I think, Derrick, maybe I'll give some context to it a little bit. Dato Derrick's credited to sorting out 24 billion or 28 billion in 12 months. So I think that's the secret sauce they want to know, because some of the restructuring are taking 4 years nowadays.
Okay, Ravi, the context of that, the imperatives then were different during the Asian financial crisis. The country then was in real financial and corporate distress. Many banks were on the brink of collapse, as you will recall. Some carrying ridiculous levels of NPLs. I mean, in some instances, for every dollar that they lent, 70 cents went south. How can any financial institution get it so wrong? Luckily, that's not happening today, but those were the conditions then. Now, we had great support. Bank Negara and the government were supportive, and they came up with these tremendous corporations or restructuring agencies. Danaharta, if you recall, to recapitalize banks. Danaharta to buy over the NPLs, and then there was CDRC to deal with very large exposures. So the environment then was much at the corporate level anyway, and even at the country level. The financial imperatives were urgent, and there had to be resolution. The government were committed, and they put together exceptional brains, I must say. It was a pleasure working with CDRC, the Danaharta guys, and together, very, very happy to say, we managed to achieve a turnaround in 3 years.
Yep.
Eventually, Danaharta got acknowledged as the best asset management company in the world. We're proud, Ravi and I are obviously very happy to have been part of that team, and that we accounted for 1/3 of those, the key components of Danaharta. I moved on to CDRC after that. And when I took over CDRC, I had 22 accounts worth 28 billion. And the powers that be, namely Bank Negara and of course the board of Danaharta, had given me 12 months to get that resolution, get CDRC, those accounts resolved. Now you asked me a question, Roseanne, about what's the trick here?
Secret. Yeah.
What's the secret? At that time, and as I said, I'm trying to draw a comparison between then and now.
Yes.
Because the imperatives and the timelines were such, you had less room for accommodation and negotiations. So you expect everybody to fall in line with the established parameters for debt restructuring. If you strayed away from that, I hold you up and I ask you to give me an explanation. If you didn't have a good explanation, I tolerate you for another meeting. By the next meeting, if you still came in with a problem without providing a solution, and the question itself was nebulous, just not leading to anywhere, my inclination then, and often I've told the questioner, can you please zip it for all our subsequent meetings? Don't open your mouth unless I ask you to open your mouth. I don't have the time. So we conducted our meetings on that basis. I have to say, in one instance, I told a fairly senior officer of a bank in front of everybody else because I was very intolerant of. I recall telling her, where are you going with this? And when there was no rational answer, I just told her, in future, and this had happened a few times, so I just told her, in future, can you please zip it at my meetings? I don't want to hear from you. And which happened for 3 or 4 accounts thereafter. I think about the 5th account, some months later, we were having a discourse, and suddenly this girl puts her hand up. She had kept, like in a classroom environment, puts her hand up and looks at me. And by this time, I was feeling very sorry for her. So I looked at her and said, yes, yes, dear, what do you want to ask? She says, sir, can I ask a question? So I said, please do. And she proceeded to ask the question. I have to say, my recollection of that was, the question is moderately better than all the previous questions, but it didn't cut my test of, But anyway, I left it and I said, okay, let's try give her an answer, and we did. Now, the essence of that is to accommodate within the environment. You must have empathy to all stakeholders. The creditor banks, which number a lot and sometimes behave in a herd fashion, and then the borrower on this side, who can be intimidated by those numbers. Sure. So you try and balance honest representation, and this Ravi and I sign off on our very being. Honest representation is critical. Empathy with all the stakeholders is critical. And at difficult meetings, if you have a reasonable sense of humor, it helps. So oftentimes in difficult environments, you bring down the temperature and start again. And that's essentially, in this environment in Malaysia, Malaysians love that. They can relate to that. So if you know which buttons to press, and you understand the psyche of Malaysian and Malaysian bankers, managing in those environments, it's not terribly difficult. It can be achieved.
And is that the same now with this current crisis? Or it's going to be, I mean, do you see differences in managing then and the stories that you say versus today with this crisis that we have currently?
Just having a chat with Ravi earlier, I think there is consensus amongst the two of us and others that the crisis, the Asian financial crisis at the country and corporate level, corporate to include banking industry, I mean, that's the banks today are in a far, far better condition than they were. There, if you recall, the rationalization as a consequence of weak capitalization, many banks folded. Today's environment is different. We don't have that sense of helplessness, but it's different at the common man level. You know, the man on the street.
Yep.
During the Asian financial crisis, there was no experience of that. Today, for right-thinking Malaysians, I mean, we drive around and we can see we live in privileged environment for many of us at this level. But we have to feel for the Malaysians who live otherwise, and that's the vast majority. Every time you drive, what do you see on the road these days? You see these Grab riders, cutting in, breaking the law with regard to traffic lights, trying to earn that, and working in all kinds of environment. Somehow, I don't seem to recognize or seem to have seen any appreciation that these guys are frontliners. If you think about it, the delivery service they provide to inbound people like us, and if you look at them running out in all kinds of weather, when it rains, they're under bridges, waiting, and it's eating into their livelihood. This kind, and then you look at the queues in Chowkit Road, lining up for food. Where have we ever seen this in our country? I think this part of it, Asian financial crisis, is no comparison. This time, it's heartbreaking. It's difficult and challenging to see our people in this kind of environment. Sorry, is that getting too a bit?
Yeah, no.
A bit too morbid there.
True, but it's a sad truth, and we got to recognize, like we said, if anything's going to change, you got to recognize the problem. Yeah.
Yeah,
but
that's
coming
true.
back to our corporate restructuring, Roshan, maybe.
Yeah.
Sorry, I must apologize to you guys, Roshan. I'm a man of many coffees in the morning.
Yes,
so.
please have your coffee because and for those of you in the audience, if you have any questions for Dato Derrick and also for Ravi, feel free to shoot them in the comments. I see a bunch of comments coming in. Thank you for Malar and others who are sending in your comments. I want to ask you a little bit about your own journey, and I'm sure you've done this many many times in terms of debt restructuring negotiations. What's been the most difficult one? What's been the most challenging one? And how did you overcome that challenge?
Okay. Although the Asian financial crisis, I talk about it as being perhaps the most challenging corporate and country-wise crisis. But for Danaharta and CDRC, we operated with certain amount of powers. These powers were sometimes, Danaharta were almost draconian, So the Danaharta institution, when we were doing debt restructuring, we were terribly empowered. We could we could literally take over, and we did, a corporation and a delinquent borrower, and usurp, if you will, the management and the board authority by appointing special administrators to run the organization. And all the corporations knew that. So when we advanced a debt restructuring proposal, Danaharta's debt restructuring proposal drove it. If there was consensus and the Danaharta Management Committee and board felt this is the right restructuring, we engaged the other institutions. This also applied to CDRC. But if there was dissent or disagreement without good basis, we had the powers to enforce the restructuring that we perceived as fair. Today's environment is very different. Today is more laissez-faire. You're down to a mediation authority, which is a very effective mediation authority, CDRC, continuing from where we left off, also sponsored and under the purview of Bank Negara. But it's more laissez-faire. So the negotiations are really give and take, listening, exchanging, trying ultimately to improve whatever proposals on the table. A bit more challenging because sometimes some of the stakeholders can sometimes adopt practices outside of the code, if you will, outside of the principles or established principles, a bit of brinkmanship there. And how do you hold them back, remind them of past experiences, the principles that have been established, and then it's just trying to have a rational argument. So I have to say, and for this reason, trying to resolve 22 accounts of 28 billion in 12 months in this environment is just impossible. You're finding that one account could take certainly in excess of 12 months. If you're lucky, it can be done within 12 months. You asked me about the most difficult account. Ravi will probably have a smirk on his face because he belabored on this account. And I mean, there were occasions when, you had to resurrect them from the dead. This account took us 4+ years. And it happened over the past, not too long ago. Wasn't during the Asian financial crisis. We didn't have any experience. This is under stage 3. This took us, more than 4 years to resolve. Eventually, it got resolved. We managed to save a whole bunch of jobs and prospects for this particular sector to survive. And this is an essential sector for the Malaysian economy. Hopefully, the promoters, given some breathing room and conditions improve on the international scale, they'll be able to survive and thrive in the future. But that one was challenging in the extreme, and I think it took away from Ravi and I think many of my 48 years. I'm and Ravi is, look at him, he's only 32. Yeah. So we shorten our lifespan. He's now 28 and I'm 40. So it took many years of our out of our lives, but we walked away having pulled out all the stops. We walked away with exceptional relationships having been established with the borrower, with the lawyers that were inside. And I like to think some of the bankers as well.
Sure. I guess that gives us I think it's good, no, because it means that that even if it took 4 years, it still got resolved, right? I think it tells you a story that there is no issue that is unsolvable or unclosable. I mean, if we put the time and effort in, ultimately we'll be able to resolve it. Huh? At least that's my quick take on it. Like, I got a couple of comments coming. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I have to say this restructuring was just under 5 billion on this one particular account.
Wow.
So it's a massive restructuring. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to come to some understanding that the ramifications, not just with society and productivity and workforces and employment, but also with regard to the impact on the NPL that Bank Negara carries, the country carries. So it had some impact on the NPL levels coming off. Yes, so it was a very large, certainly the largest that Ravi and I or Sage 3 have done over the past 10 years.
Exciting. I'm just going to go through a couple of comments that are out there. So JJ Mock says, economic is about eating and bubble. I think in reference to your Grab piece, and also I think in reference to the Grab comment was Peter Lowe says, yes, it's difficult and challenging, sad truth, but we will overcome. Right? I think the positivity of overcoming. Muller says, adds, I love the leadership examples as coming through clarity, contextual yet empathy, authenticity and humor. Keep it human and real. Thank you, Dato Derrick and Ravi. And a couple more comments coming in. Is really for those of you who have missed the episodes 1, 2, and 3. They are already out on the links. You can catch them. So one of the things in episode 1, right, was to talk about the mindset when it comes to we have to change our mindset when it comes to transformation. Now, for negotiations, right, can you elaborate a little bit in terms of what's the mindset for negotiations that are needed, especially for promoters, right? And those listening to the show. Is there a mindset change that needs to happen?
Yeah. Yes, there are some fundamental mindset changes. If you're coming into a restructuring mode, and many of these promoters are captains of industry, it's a humbling experience because you're coming into a level and you're interacting with not so experienced or not so senior relationship executives from the banking industry. More often than not, they're middle ranking to some level of seniority, but you're having to get down and interact at that level. Whereas previously, your head of corporate or one of your divisional heads would be handling this. For you to achieve success, you must attend these meetings yourself, and you're interacting at a level that you certainly never interacted before. The other thing, of course, is you need to come in with a mentality wherein you have, well, it's actually forced upon you. You need to be able to interact and give and negotiate at that particular level. You can't come in as a captain of industry wearing that particular hat. That's not going to work. And there will be a moderator, also not as senior, certainly not as well paid as you, who will be driving the meeting. So come down to some reality here. And where we, the specialists and other advisors come in, and this is the crux, we take over. So you captain of industry, and if you have a board representative joining you, or your senior guys, invariably head of legal, head of corporate, head of treasury, all are accompanying you at these meetings. When it comes to debt restructuring, be prepared to surrender that to 2 or 3 individuals from the specialist or advisory firm that's going to take you through this specialist process. It is not your skill. Your skill is in running, being an entrepreneur. Recognize here, you've got a steep learning curve. And those corporations that have adapted, and accepted that mentality have thrived. They've listened to professional advice, which has facilitated the final success and achievement in the debt restructuring with the other stakeholders, principally the bankers. And understand, notwithstanding that they may not always be the most senior people in the banks, understand that many of them come in with tremendous skills at the debt restructuring level. They've been through this many times. So give them some respect, please, for the specialism that they have. So coming to these meetings with that mindset, and again, I have to say, have some level of empathy for people. This is a shared problem. The banks are carrying a huge level of debt. You have an exposure, you're trying to salvage your company, yes, but this is a shared perspective. It has to be a joint consensual resolution. If you will, a lose-lose or a win-win for all. It can't be I win and you lose.
Yeah.
And I think as honest brokers, certainly I can speak for Ravi. Ravi and I only have that approach. If we've made a mistake sometimes, and we do, in advancing the cause of our promoter, because you could argue he's paying our bill, and sometimes there's that. Sometimes if we err, we're quick to make the rectifications and put that right. And the other thing about undertaking this kind of a job and bringing to bear the independence, I love that we are financially independent. In other words, there's nothing that you can do, promoter, no matter your net worth, that's going to influence my lifestyle going forward. So that helps in the negotiations. So that understanding of, I know where you're coming from, let's put that in perspective. So nobody is bullied, not least the bankers in this process.
Sure. And I want to get to this consensus.
Yeah,
go ahead, Ravi.
On the empathy for the bankers, I mean, we have to feel for them because, I mean, there is two sides of the coin. We see our clients once, twice, but these bankers, we see them for a long, long time. So, it is good that we actually think of them. And some of them have really tough times. I've spoken to some of these guys. They go up to the committees, they're trying to they've got 10 minutes to put up the case, and then they get bashed in the committee. So again, they too have a tough time, and we are always mindful of that. But at the same time, of course, then you could say the easiest thing for an advisor to do is, let's give in to everything for the banks, and just agree to no waivers, nothing. But that's also not being honest, because you got to really sit down and look at the numbers honestly, right? And that's why we said honesty is the important part. Is that what can really be sustained? That's critical.
Yep. So a couple of comments again. Go ahead.
Can we just take a break? I want to give the audience, if they can see, the benefit of where I'm seated. So this actually is my lounge in my master bedroom. My master bedroom is 1,200 square feet. So this is the lounge part of it, and over there is, you can't see the master bed, that huge bed. And my wife is lying there and wait. As soon as I finish this session, she's waiting for me. I can see some level of desperation there. So I don't know where you guys are journeying to, but I've got a warm bed waiting for me.
And at that note, there's a couple of comments coming in. Peter Lowe says, yes, leave it to the experts. Drop your baggage. Put your pride aside. It's time to get real. And he adds, work together for a win-win situation. And together, we will be stronger. Together, we will overcome. Together, we will achieve. Sashi adds, the empathy aspect is often overlooked, and I think there's a conversation going on there. Yes, indeed, empathy is an important element. We're going to take a 30-second break so that we can let Dato Derrick and Ravi stretch their and we're going to take a quick what we call Nicole break. So we're going to check out Nicole, this amazing app that's available for you. So let's take a break. Welcome back to Rethinking Balance Sheets, and we're with Dato Derrick Fernandez, and we're talking about negotiations. And one of the things, and restructuring, right? And one of the things we hear a lot is on consensus-based negotiations or consensus-based restructuring, where you try to get consensus from the various stakeholders, be it secured, unsecured, regulators, shareholders, and so on and so forth. But Dato Derrick, I know you have some magical sauce that you use to enable all these things to happen. But how is this something that what's your perspective on that, because everyone's going to have differing perspective? How do you actually bring them to the table, and how do you actually get them to the same sort of wavelength and into this so-called win-win situation where everyone's thinking win-win for each other, and not get into this win-lose paradigm that you talk about?
Yeah. This world of debt restructuring is not something that's nebulous. It's there. It's evolved over many years, principally since the time of Danaharta and CDRC during the Asian financial crisis. The principles then, the lessons learned, were codified over a period of time, and there's now a code of practice. So all the salient aspects pertaining to debt restructuring are well known by the practitioners, the experienced practitioners here, and if not, they're in some codified form. CDRC has this code of practice, and that embodies much of that. Within Sage 3, we have a whole minefield of this. It's stuff that we've colluted. So the most critical phase, and Ravi alluded to it earlier, and I think it might have been covered in one of the earlier segments, is putting together the base proposal. That's where the analysis, the evaluation comes in, pulling all our experiences, taking into account the code, and that base case proposal is invariably put together by advisory firms, say a firm like Sage 3. That has to be substantively right based on our experience. Equity and fairness comes into it. That's where that marshalling. If you want this to succeed, there must be something in it for everybody. As I said, it can't be a win-lose situation.
Yep.
Let it be a win-win for all or lose-lose for all. Now, that approach, so that base case proposal, we at Sage 3 have to get that substantially right. And so when you go to, say, the creditor banks, and you've interacted with CDRC for their input, you're working off a platform that has a reasonable chance of success, and it's based on parameters and principles the banks can relate to. So the question, if you're trying to be smart and pull the wool over people's eyes, that doesn't work. So you've got to be honest in your base case evaluation and proposal. And once you've got that, the nebulous, all that uncertainty is removed. That's the base document. Hey guys, can we have your input? And then you interact. Then the joint consensual conclusion. That's critical. So the way I've presented to you, it's not rocket scientist stuff, Roshan. It's there. It's there to be exploited. But where it becomes rocket scientist stuff is in the original phase of putting the deal together. That becomes, I'm afraid, you've got to have the experience for that, and built into your genes, if you will, or your psyche, must be that empathy for what is this perspective, what is their likely perspective, what is it that they will want. And often it helps if you think about the most recalcitrant or difficult bank and say, this bloody asshole is going to ask, sorry, excuse the language, is going to ask for this, likely. And then you say, how do we address it? So when it comes up, you're not reacting in an adverse fashion. You're ready to have a rational discussion, and then come to a consensus with CDRC in mediation.
And so that Yeah, no, so I mean that the process that you take prior to setting up that base case is critical, so that you get that input from all these different quarters, or at least at least understanding what their positioning will be, so that you can understand the gaps and be able to build a base case accordingly. I assume that would be what you're sort of alluding to, right?
Indeed. I think apart from the actual negotiation phase, when it can be the communications get quite challenging. But for us, the most challenging time for Sage 3 is that analysis and evaluation in putting up the first case. Because the brainstorming sessions that we have within the Sage 3 directors, I have to say, even that's sometimes very challenging for me. As you go down this ladder of age, and closer to being a geriatric, sometimes you get youthful people like Ravi, and his incessant need to have a good fight, and it can be challenging. But that's where Sage 3 is at its best. We allow for this banter and this interaction, so that everybody is anticipating the likely difficulties. So we come to a base case, what we think is a reasonable proposition.
Sure.
Are you guys okay, CDRC, with this? Can we then take it to the bankers for consideration?
Sure. But let me push the needle a little bit on this here, because I'm sure there's some folks will have some entrenched position that they refuse to budge from that position, or some dogmatic view, either side of the divide, right? Either borrower or lender, right? How do you deal with when there is no room to maneuver, with people taking such positions? How do you deal with them?
Okay, I think that that concept, or that view about no room to maneuver, I think both Ravi and I probably never have that perspective.
Okay.
There's always room to maneuver. One of the things that we do is, let's say, let me give you an example. You have a borrower, a company which has $1 billion worth of debt. And they're generating cash, and that's our fundamental criteria measure. And they're generating cash of maybe $50 million a year. That EBITDA of 50 million. That equation doesn't work. 50 million of EBITDA can't sustain $1 billion. Something has to give. If you get it debt level down to about 400-500 million, you got a fighting chance, especially the prospects going forward look prospective and look like they're likely to improve for the company. So how do you get bankers to agree, hey, the debt level is going to be shaved, 500 million has to be, written off, converted into equity? That's a challenge. But of course, bankers are either secured or unsecured. And if you look at the secured assets, and we'll get independent professionals to give us an updated assessment. So here the banker says, I've got, in this $1 billion instance, I've got these properties. They're worth, at valuation originally, 500 million, 600 million. So I want a premium above that, otherwise I might as well go for liquidation. So we get a current valuation in the current environment. And then if that valuation throws out the sum of, and that's invariably a valuer that we use that's acceptable by the banks and one of their tier one appointees. And if they come up with a valuation of, say, 350 million, certainly the valuation numbers have dropped. So your realizability is only 350. So in a worst case scenario, if you're going for liquidation, your realization is 350. Here we're giving you 500 plus. So to start off with your 150 million ahead of your valuation, you'll find some way to repay that 500 over a period of time. All your security remains intact. Now, how do we deal with the differential 500? That's where the negotiations come in. And that's where some level of innovation is required. But the reality check is here. So when you say, what happens if you find yourself in a situation where there's no hope? Actually, your call then is to tell the bankers, look, you can realize 350, but that's the worst kind of realization in a liquidation, because chances are you'll incur a lot of costs towards liquidation, and chances are you'll never get the 350, you'll get much less. you have to pay for the costs. So in this case, ride with us, your 150 million up, your upside. But if you want to choose liquidation as your option, here are the figures. These are the valuers agreed by your appointed valuer. You choose. And of course, at the end of the day, if they make the wrong choice, Sage 3 has done its best and laid bare the evaluation for them to do. Honestly, it'll be challenging for any credit committee if they're in control and they have all the facts in front of them. It will be very challenging for them to make a decision. Okay, let's go with liquidation. And then if you add on to that the socio-economic advantages, you preserve a Malaysian entity. It may be an export-oriented industry. There's always jobs at stake. Those are the soft aspects of that restructuring. And CDRC is quick to point to these because it's important from the national perspective. When you put that down and you marshal your thoughts, okay, over to you guys, banks, you make a decision. That can be challenging to come back and say, no, we want to still go for liquidation. I mean, I've simplified the argument, just to make it so that everybody can understand this example and why. I have to say more Ravi than me, but in his psyche, I mean, I have to say this guy's like, well, I mean, it'd be terrible for me to suggest. I mean, I'm a Christian, but this guy's resurrection from the dead of corporate distressed companies. I mean, he's. I must say, it's good to have him on site. He comes up with some. He comes up with some.
I've done one better. I got money back from the IRB now. I think the phone call won't stop ringing after this.
It's almost about time for us to wrap it up. But I got a couple more questions, I think, and I think there's a lot of interest. And the audience, if you have any other questions, shoot them in. But I'll take another maybe 3 to 5 minutes because I think on one side, when you have a negotiation, there's always some time of last minute requests for additional concessions when you've sort of already finalize the negotiations. That's one. I mean, the other piece is that when you have negotiations like this, can parties realistically walk away from the negotiation table when so much has been invested, so much time has been? Do you actually see that happening where people just walk away? So on one side, how do you deal with this last minute request? And the other side is, what's your perspective on walk away when things don't work out?
Okay, let me answer the latter question first. As I said, I think I may have said this earlier, but in the Sage 3 psyche, there's never this perspective of walking away. It's just not there. With regard to last-minute requests, and sometimes it can be absurd, ridiculous requests, this question of the brinkmanship, unfortunately, we're seeing one or two institutions repeat offenders. There is an accounting to be had, because if you are coming in, everybody else having agreed, and then you come in the last minute, and this brinkmanship, you push the envelope to another level and say, okay, I want another 100 million. Now, where is that going to come from? And you have to reinvent and start the negotiations. Of course, the other stakeholder, the banks, because if one institution can get the 100 million, they having agreed the entire restructuring with one institution putting, the others just keep quiet. If one particular bank can succeed, everybody else benefits. But it reopens the entire process, having spent possibly many, many months, more than a year, and then pushing it. Our approach is simply to then have a dialogue with the borrower to determine whether they have an appetite to accommodate that request, and if so, how much of that request. It is ultimately the borrower's call. Our role is to evaluate, advise, and provide some optionality for them to consider, make it simpler for them to make a decision. The other thing, of course, is for us to engage the moderator, in this case, CDRC, and for them to revert to their counsel to determine whether this is the manner of negotiation, the character of this kind of approach, whether it's to be tolerated and accepted in a restructuring mode within a Bank Negara sponsored committee. So it happens. It's happened. Well, it's happened at least once or twice. And that particular account, that very difficult account I talked about, it happened then. But we worked through a concession where a portion or a fair add-on to the agreed number was agreed to be enhanced by about 20%, but payable on the 11th year. So there was a moratorium. So let's say we agreed to 100 million extra, and they were happy with that, fine. But in terms of time value of money, Roshan, when you get paid 100 million over 11 years, your time value of money, you're not actually paying from a businessman's perspective. So they say, okay, it comes to 40 odd million. Okay, Dato and Ravi, let's close it and walk away. So we never say no. We haven't encountered a situation where the envelope has been so pushed that both of us have said, sod you guys, we're totally headed with this. We haven't come to experience such a situation yet.
I think, but we did experience, I think not me, I left Danaharta by then, but we experienced this with Pahang State Corporation.
Okay, let me, well, okay, Ravi, you've mentioned it, but I had Johor Corp and I had Pahang State under and CDRC. Johor Corp was about 5 over billion. Pahang State was 825 million something. And the Pahang State authorities were being bullied, hammered. They were being threatened, and they were being threatened by a foreign bank. Actually, it's a bank I worked for. I started my banking career in that bank, but they had this pathetic Matsale in charge of that of recovery, and he was insolent, if not downright, and we are intolerant of those kind of buggers in Malaysia. We've had it for up to independence. So when he had this kind of brash behavior, well, okay, I worked with the Pahang people, and they had an advisor who was helping them. So I organized the first meeting at Bank Negara and had all the bankers there, and they were making this usual noise. But I had already agreed a strategy with the Pahang state authorities, and I didn't share it with the advisor. Suddenly, the advisor opens his mouth to try and interact. So I told him, hey, look, you just keep quiet. Don't open your mouth. Very senior man, by the way. Open it when I ask you to open it. I have no time. So then I looked at the Matsale and I said, hey, this state government has agreed. All your security, you can have it. Here, take and go. You can deal with it. Your wish list has come through. Any other questions? All stunned. So I said, okay, on that basis, thank you very much for coming. We will arrange the documentation. You can have your security. But Roshan, what was the security? It was undeveloped land in Pahang State. Proposed to do some infrastructure. So without the state government's alignment, road, utilities, what value do you have?
Yeah.
And I think the banks had ascribed a higher value. So when you say take this useless piece of land, hey, full settlement, and there was no other obligations. So we left the meeting. The Pahang State people were a bit jittery what the outcome was going to be. Anyway, I went back to my room. After about 1 hour, the secretary says, Mr. Fernandes, there's a call from Standard Chartered Bank for you. And this tweet was on the other end of the phone. Mr. Fernandes. I said, yes. He said, no. I think, sir, you misunderstood. We don't want the security. I said, but the way you've been beating down on these borrowers, downright uncouth, this kind of behavior. So they've had it with you. Take your... So I said, no, we don't want it. So I said, okay, what's your proposal then? He said, no, we don't mind giving you a 50% haircut. Can you imagine on the phone? So I said, now you're talking. I said, let me talk to the Pahang State people. So we went back, said, look, these buggers are willing to offer a 50% haircut. They got excited, okay, we'll take it. You know, at Danaharta and CDRC, the general rule of thumb was we don't give you more than 30% haircut, you know. So I looked at the Pahang people and I said, hey, did you borrow this money? Don't you feel a moral obligation to repay? I'm not going to agree. We're not going to agree a 50% haircut. If you want, we can give you a 25% haircut, which is still about 225 million. That one I can support and put it to our board, our management committee. So they said, okay, we'll accept that. We got that restructuring done in 3 months.
Wow. Okay.
Now, autocratic behavior, not conventional, but ultimately effective.
And in the end, you help both sides ultimately.
Yeah.
So maybe as we wrap up today, Ravi, maybe we'll start with you. I mean, your final thoughts from today. What are your key takeaways, and what did you take out of today's dialogue with Dato Derrick?
Thanks, Roshan. I think I know our show is very much for SMEs, and I think I'll refer back the SMEs to look back at the episode where we had David Fernandez talk about SDRS. But it doesn't mean that the principles spoke about here, empathy, fairness, etc., applies equally for the large corporations that Dato Derrick was talking about, or even for SMEs. Again, if you do that in the right way, the chances are the negotiation phase will go well. Yeah, and you will conclude.
Okay, and yourself, Dato Derrick, your final thoughts as we wrap up this very engaging, very informative, and I love the war stories and some of the anecdotes that shared. You know, tell us what your final thoughts, your final sort of advice that you'd like to give our viewers out there.
Okay, I think I talked about the sage tree psyche, never giving up. I think that within a context, Malaysian context, although generally our country and people are going through very, very challenging times, I quite like the input of, I think it's Peter, is it?
Yeah.
One of the, Peter Low.
Yeah.
I must say, his commentary is tremendously uplifting, you know. I was just reading it and always on a positive side. So to my, even in a very difficult, challenging environment and a difficult sector to try and manage with some success, we've done well enough. So I'd like to conclude with a plea to all whoever is listening here, to Malaysian brothers and sisters. Notwithstanding the challenging times, I have to say we pulled together and work at it with commitment. And we have a tremendous history of achieving this, even in the most of adverse times. I have to say, I mean, I go back to the Asian financial crisis. When we worked together and pulled together as one nation, we achieved greatness, such that the Danaharta model was cited as being the best asset management model, example of an asset management company in the world. And virtually every other country, Korea, Turkey, Thailand, Mexico, I think Iran, even others, were making trips to Danaharta to learn our model. Why did it work for us then during the Asian financial crisis, just over 20 years ago? The question I will ask is, would that repeat itself today? Why such greatness then, and why such lack of it now? Imbued within the Malaysian people is an ability to achieve greatness. We've always known that. Sometimes we look at our Singapore neighbors and we just despair, but we have imbued within our means that potential to achieve great success. So Malaysians, hang in there. We have the potential for greatness. I hope today's little session illustrates and demonstrates there are still people in our country capable of achieving exceptional, producing exceptional end results. So thank you for this opportunity, Rosan.
Yep.
Nice having you, Ravi.
And you know, there's so much comments coming in. David Leo says, excellent talk. There's too much noise these days from individuals that crowd social media without a thorough understanding of the complexity from all parties. So I think that's a great takeaway, you know, is that understanding that complexity. And I think Peter Low reinforces what you say. Marilah kita berjuang. Let's all fight together and be and I think that's a good way to wrap up this show. You know, let's pull ourselves together as one and together, you know, face this challenge of this pandemic and hopefully be able to not just overcome but thrive in the many days ahead. So thank you, Dato Derrick. Thank you, Ravi. It's been a fabulous show. We're right on the hour. I'm gonna end now and wish you all the best for the coming weekend. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you next Friday, same time, same place, here on Rethinking Balance Sheets. I'm gonna end with a short little video on Budaya and wrap this whole thing up. So for those of you who haven't checked out Budaya, check it out, a great little app that's out there called Happily or Budaya. That's a wrap for us today. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Rethinking Balance Sheets with Ravi Navaratnam and myself, Roshan Theran. Signing out for today. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.